Let me tell you what just happened in Haifa, and why this single strike may have fundamentally altered the outcome of this conflict. A Shahab 3 ballistic missile hit Haifa's port district at 9:34 tonight. Not a drone, not a cruise missile, a ballistic missile designed to deliver nuclear payloads, and it landed in the middle of Israel's most strategically concentrated industrial city, while hundreds of thousands of people were still awake. What burned after that impact was not one target. It was three of the most irreplaceable pieces of infrastructure Israel has left. And by the time I finish walking you through exactly what was lost tonight, you will understand why this strike is not just the most damaging attack of this conflict. It may be the one that decides it. Haifa was never just a city. It was the backup plan. When Iran cratered Ben Gurion's runways and shut down Israel's primary air gateway, Haifa's port absorbed everything. Every interceptor component, every radar part, every pharmaceutical shipment, every ton of military hardware that Israel could no longer fly in had to come through Haifa's container terminals. The port was handling roughly 60% of Israel's total import and export volume before the conflict even began. After Ben Gurion went dark, it was handling everything that mattered. There was no redundancy left. Haifa was not a secondary option. It had become the sole remaining lifeline connecting Israel to the outside world. And tonight, Iran put a Shahab 3 through it. The port is not damaged. Understand that distinction clearly. Damaged infrastructure can be worked around. What happened tonight is categorically different. The crane systems that move containers on and off vessels are gone. The fuel storage powering the port's logistics equipment is burning. The control infrastructure coordinating vessel movement through the harbour approaches has been compromised. And the approach channels themselves, the navigable water lanes that bring ships into the terminal, have sustained blast and structural impact from a warhead in the 1,000-kilogram class detonating in a densely built port district. Ships that were en route to Haifa tonight carrying what Israel desperately needs can see the fire from open water. They are not docking. The port of Haifa is finished as a functioning gateway, and the timeline for restoring it to the capacity Israel requires is not days. It is months. If the structural damage assessment comes back anywhere near as severe as the initial imagery suggests. But if you think losing the port is the worst of what happened tonight in Haifa, stay with me, because the next target compounds everything. The Elbit Systems manufacturing complex in Haifa was Israel's last major functioning defense production hub. Let me put that in context. Iran destroyed the Rafael facility weeks ago. Rafael produced the Tamir interceptors that feed the Iron Dome. That production is gone. With it went Israel's ability to replace the interceptors being fired in this conflict at the rate they are being consumed. What remained after Rafael was Elbit, not an identical replacement, but the surviving half of Israel's domestic defense industrial base. Elbit produces the electronic warfare systems protecting Israeli aircraft. It produces the targeting systems guiding Israeli precision munitions. It produces the drone platforms providing the IDF with intelligence and reconnaissance across every active theater of operations. It produces the command and control systems, keeping what remains of Israel's military decision-making architecture functional despite the degradation it has already absorbed. All of that production capability was concentrated in the Haifa complex, and tonight, the same Shahab 3 that destroyed the port destroyed Elbit Haifa. The consequences of losing Elbit Haifa are not immediate in the way losing Rafael was immediate. The interceptor shortage from Rafael hit Israeli air defense within days. The Elbit damage works on a longer timeline, weeks and months rather than hours and days. But that does not make it less decisive. It makes it more insidious. In the coming weeks, Israeli aircraft will begin operating with electronic warfare systems that cannot be serviced or replaced at the rate they are failing. Precision munitions will begin missing because targeting system components cannot be sourced. Drone operations will degrade as platforms go offline without the replacement parts that Elbit Haifa was producing. The IDF's command architecture, already under pressure from earlier strikes on its primary command infrastructure, will find itself unable to sustain the systems keeping it coherent. Iran did not just blow up a factory tonight. It set a timer on Israel's operational military capability. And the clock is now running. Iran has now destroyed both of Israel's primary defense manufacturing facilities. Rafael is gone. Elbit Haifa is gone. Israel Aerospace Industries, which operates near the Ben Gurion area, remains the only major complex not directly struck. But its operations are running at degraded capacity due to the disruption surrounding Ben Gurion's closure. It has not been eliminated, but it is not whole. 2 of the 3 pillars of Israel's domestic defense production are rubble. The third is weakened. This is not a temporary production setback. This is a structural collapse of Israel's ability to manufacture and maintain the hardware its military depends on. It cannot be reversed quickly under any circumstances. It absolutely cannot be reversed quickly in the middle of an active conflict with no functioning air gateway, and now no functioning sea gateway either. And what happens next changes the entire picture, because the third target hit tonight turns a military and industrial crisis into an energy crisis simultaneously. The Bazan oil refinery group, Israel's largest petroleum refining complex, was also inside the port district when that Shahab 3 detonated. Bazan converts crude oil into the fuel products that every component of Israeli society and Israeli military operations depends on. Aviation fuel for the aircraft still flying. Diesel for the generators keeping hospitals operational and critical infrastructure running in a conflict that has already pushed civilian systems to their limits. Petrol for the transport vehicles, military and civilian alike, that keep people and supplies moving across a country under sustained attack. That refining capacity is now on fire. Refinery fires are not ordinary industrial fires. They burn at temperatures that destroy equipment beyond repair. They release toxic combustion products across wide areas. They require specialized suppression capabilities that Israeli emergency services were already stretched thin providing before tonight. The fire burning in Haifa right now will not be extinguished quickly. It will burn for days. And when it is finally extinguished, what remains will not be repaired. It will need to be rebuilt from the ground up in Nashim Deoth, and that rebuilding cannot begin until the conflict ends. Israel has now lost its air gateway, its sea gateway, its two largest weapons production facilities, and its primary fuel refining capacity, all in a single conflict. The last of those losses happened tonight. Within the same few seconds, it took a Shahab 3 warhead to reach the port district of Haifa at 9:34. But stay with me, because the weapon itself carries a message that goes beyond the physical destruction, and it is a message that no government official in Jerusalem is addressing honestly tonight. The Shahab 3 is Iran's designated nuclear delivery system. That is not an analytical characterization, that is its designed function. It was built to carry nuclear warheads. It has the range, the payload capacity, and the guidance architecture of a nuclear-capable ballistic missile. Tonight is not the first time Iran has used it in this conflict. The Shahab 3 previously struck Dimona, Israel's nuclear facility. The Israeli government's response to that strike was conspicuously silent on the question of what the warhead actually contained. The CTBTO monitoring network detected elevated radionuclide readings following that strike. The government did not address those readings directly. The silence was noted internationally and not explained. Now the same missile has struck Haifa, a civilian city of 280,000 people, not a military installation, not a hardened facility, but a living city with restaurants open and families moving through their evening when the warhead arrived. The official statement released after tonight's strike confirms that a missile hit the port district and that emergency services are responding. It does not confirm the missile type. It does not address the warhead classification. It does not tell the population of Haifa whether what is burning in their city is the result of a conventional payload or something else entirely. It is the same controlled, minimal language used after Dimona, the same pattern, the same deliberate absence of the one piece of information that the people breathing the air downwind of that fire most urgently need. The CTBTO monitoring stations in Cyprus, Turkey, and Greece are already processing atmospheric data. Their readings in the coming hours will provide the first independent signal of what that warhead actually carried. Until those readings are available and made public, the population of Haifa is being managed, not informed. And that distinction matters enormously when the question being avoided is whether a nuclear-capable missile just detonated in a civilian port district while the city was fully awake. I want you to think carefully about what that silence represents strategically. Governments do not withhold warhead classification information from their own populations out of bureaucratic delay. They withhold it because confirming the answer creates consequences they are not prepared to manage. If the warhead was conventional, confirming that costs nothing and provides immediate reassurance to a frightened population. Governments confirm conventional payloads quickly. The fact that this government is not confirming it quickly, the fact that the same silence that followed Dimona is now following Haifa, tells you something about what the assessment inside the government actually looks like right now. I am not telling you the warhead was nuclear. I am telling you that the behavior of a government confident it was conventional does not look like this, and the people of Haifa deserve to know the difference. And if you think the strategic implications stop at the physical destruction and the warhead question, stay with me, because the political and social dimensions of striking Haifa specifically add a layer that purely military analysis cannot capture. Haifa has carried a specific symbolic weight inside Israeli society for decades. It is the city most frequently cited as a functioning example of Jewish-Arab coexistence within Israel. The civic integration in Haifa, the degree to which Jewish and Arab communities share public space, economic life, and municipal governance, is higher than in any other major Israeli city. This has been a point of genuine national pride, and for those who believe coexistence is possible, a proof of concept. The Shahab 3 did not target a Jewish neighborhood or an Arab neighborhood. It targeted the shared industrial infrastructure that both communities depend on. The port employs both. The refinery employs both. The Elbit complex employed both. The destruction is shared equally, and the message embedded in that targeting, whether intentional or incidental, strikes directly at the social fabric that Haifa represented. Throughout this conflict, communal tensions across Israel have been building quietly beneath the surface of a society focused on external threat. They have not erupted into open internal crisis, but they have been building. A strike on the symbolic city of coexistence, delivered by a nuclear-capable missile while the city was awake and populated, adds pressure to those fault lines that the external military situation alone was not producing. This is not a secondary concern. Social cohesion is a strategic asset. Its degradation is a strategic liability. And Iran just struck it directly, whether or not that was the primary intention. The international response to tonight's strike is already accelerating along lines that are meaningfully different from the response to previous Iranian attacks in this conflict. Previous strikes hit Ben Gurion Airport, infrastructure. They hit the Rafael facility, a defense installation. They hit Dimona, a nuclear site that the international community has complicated feelings about acknowledging. Tonight's strike hit a civilian city during active evening hours. Haifa is not an abstraction. It has universities, it has hospitals, it has restaurants that were serving dinner when the war had arrived. It has a port district where workers were present. The civilian character of the target is unambiguous in a way that hardened military and industrial facilities are not, and the international framing of this strike will reflect that difference. Western governments that have been calibrating their public responses carefully throughout this conflict now face pressure from populations and media that are processing images of a burning civilian city rather than a burning airstrip or a burning weapons plant. That pressure changes the political calculus in Washington, in Brussels, in London. How it changes it, whether it accelerates intervention, whether it produces new restraint demands on Israel, whether it opens space for diplomatic off-ramps that neither side has been willing to accept, remains to be seen. But the strike on Haifa has altered the international political environment of this conflict in ways that will become clearer in the coming days. Now let me bring this together strategically, because the cumulative picture is what matters most, and it is not being stated clearly enough anywhere tonight. At the beginning of this conflict, Israel possessed a functioning air gateway at Ben Gurion, a functioning sea gateway at Haifa, two major domestic defense production complexes at Rafael and Elbit Haifa, primary fuel refining capacity at Bazan, and a command and control architecture that, while under pressure, remained largely intact. Each of those assets represented a pillar supporting Israel's ability to sustain military operations and absorb the costs of a prolonged conflict. Iran's campaign has now systematically removed every one of them. Ben Gurion is gone, Haifa port is gone, Rafael is gone, Elbit Haifa is gone, Bazan is burning, the command infrastructure has been degraded by earlier strikes. What remains is Israel aerospace industries operating at reduced capacity, secondary port facilities at Ashdod and Eilat that were never designed to absorb the volume Haifa handled, and whatever fuel reserves exist in storage facilities that have not yet been struck. That is what Israel has left to work with, not a degraded version of what it started with, a fundamentally different and far more constrained strategic position. The question that every serious analyst needs to be asking right now is not what Iran's next target is. The question is whether Israel retains the logistical and industrial foundation required to continue conducting the kind of military operations this conflict demands. You cannot sustain high-tempo air operations without aviation fuel. You can no longer refine domestically, and can no longer import through a port that no longer functions. You cannot replace interceptors you are firing at the rate this conflict demands when the facility that produced them is rubble and the port through which components could arrive is offline. You cannot maintain the electronic systems, the targeting systems, the drone platforms, and the command architecture that modern military operations depend on when the manufacturing complex responsible for producing and servicing those systems has just been destroyed. These are not political observations, they are logistical realities. And logistical realities, more than any battlefield development, determine the outcomes of sustained conflicts. Iran understands this. What we are watching is not a series of emotionally satisfying strikes against symbolic targets. It is a methodical, sequenced campaign against the specific nodes that sustain Israeli military capability over time. The targeting logic has been consistent from the beginning. Air gateway first, to eliminate rapid resupply. Primary weapons production second, to begin the interceptor clock. Sea gateway and secondary weapons production third, to close the last resupply route and accelerate the manufacturing collapse simultaneously. Fuel refining included in the third strike to add energy crisis to the industrial and military crisis already underway. This is not improvisation. This is a campaign designed by people who studied the problem carefully and identified the sequence in which removing each node compounds the damage done by removing the previous ones. That level of strategic planning deserves to be recognized for what it is. regardless of what one thinks about the parties involved. What comes next is the question that matters most, and the one I can give you the most honest answer about. Israel's options are narrowing at a rate that its government has not publicly acknowledged and that its international partners have not yet fully absorbed. The military path forward requires resources, fuel, interceptors, electronic systems, imported hardware, that Israel's remaining logistics infrastructure cannot deliver at the required rate. The diplomatic path requires a willingness to accept terms that Israeli domestic politics have made nearly impossible to accept publicly, particularly in the current environment of sustained attack and civilian casualties. The international intervention path requires a level of consensus and commitment from Western partners that has not materialized despite the escalating severity of Iranian strikes. None of those paths is clean. None of them is without cost. But the alternative, continuing a high-tempo military campaign on a logistical foundation that is now critically damaged, leads to a place that is worse than any of them,